There is a moment in every parent's life when they look at their child and quietly wonder, am I doing this right? Not loudly, not with confidence, but in silence, in the middle of a tired evening, in that space where love and worry sit together. And if you are that parent, let me tell you something very gently today. It's not about being a perfect parent. It's about avoiding a few silent mistakes that slowly shape a child's heart. So today, let's talk about something very important. Never do this to your child, not as a lecture, but as a conversation between hearts. There is something very subtle but deeply powerful that happens in the heart of a child when they are compared. It doesn't always show immediately, it doesn't cry out loudly, but it settles quietly like dust on a beautiful mirror. A child who is constantly compared begins to look at themselves not through their own eyes, but through the eyes of others. And that is where the trouble begins. You might say, look at your cousin, look at your classmate, look at that neighbor's child. And from your intention, it may come from concern, even love. You want your child to improve, to grow, to succeed. But what the child hears is something very different. They hear, who you are is not enough. And slowly, without even realizing it, they begin to disconnect from their own uniqueness. A child who once drew with joy starts erasing their confidence. A child who once spoke freely begins to hesitate. Not because they lack ability, but because they start believing they are always behind. Comparison is strange. It doesn't inspire every time. More often, it quietly replaces self worth with self doubt. Imagine two birds. One is told, why don't you fly like that bird? But nature never designed both birds to fly the same way. One soars high, another glides low, but both have their place in the sky. Children are like that too. Each one carries a different rhythm of growth. Some are quick in academics, some in emotions, some in creativity, some in empathy. But when we compare, we destroy that rhythm and try to force a uniform standard. And here is the deeper truth. Children who grow up constantly compared often become adults who are never satisfied with themselves. Even when they succeed, they feel it is never enough, because in their inner world, they are still chasing someone else's shadow. So, what should a parent do instead? Observe your child like a gardener, not like a judge. A gardener never shouts at a rose for not being a lotus. The gardener simply asks, what does this flower need to bloom? That shift changes everything. When a child feels seen for who they are, not who they are, compared to, they begin to grow with confidence. They stop competing and start becoming. And that is the real goal of parenting, not to produce the best child in comparison, but to nurture the most authentic version of your child. Because in the end, the world does not need copies, it needs originals. One of the most tender spaces in life is the emotional world of a child. It is delicate, unfiltered, and deeply honest. When a child comes to you crying over something that seems small, a broken toy, a disagreement with a friend, a moment of rejection, it is very easy for an adult mind to minimize it. We say things like, it's nothing, or don't be silly, or you'll forget it tomorrow. But in that moment, something very important is happening inside the child's heart. That small incident is not small to them. It is their entire emotional universe at that moment. And when we dismiss it, we unintentionally send a message. What you feel is not important. The danger is not the moment itself. The danger is the pattern. Because over time, a child who is repeatedly told that their emotions are unimportant begins to do something very protective. They stop sharing. Not because they have become strong, but because they have learned that vulnerability is not welcome. And so they start carrying things alone. They smile outside, but inside they build silent walls. A child who is not emotionally validated slowly becomes an adult who struggles to express feelings. They may find it difficult to trust, to open up, to ask for help. Not because they don't want to, but because they learned early that emotions are inconvenient. But imagine a different response. A child comes crying. Instead of dismissing, you kneel down. You look into their eyes and say, tell me what happened. Not to fix it immediately, but to understand it first. And suddenly, something shifts. The child feels safe. Not because the problem disappeared, but because they were heard. That is the real magic. Emotional validation does not spoil a child, it strengthens them. It teaches them that emotions are not weaknesses, they are signals. They are human. And a child who learns to understand their emotions becomes an adult who understands others too. That is the foundation of empathy, relationships, and emotional intelligence. So never measure the size of the problem through adult eyes. Measure it through the heart that is experiencing it. Because to a child, nothing is just a small thing. It is their world in that moment. And when you respect that world, you are not just comforting them, you are shaping how they will understand themselves for life. Words are powerful, far more powerful than we realize in parenting. Because a child does not just hear words, they absorb them, they store them, and eventually they start living them. When a parent says you are lazy, or you are careless, or you are not smart, it may come in frustration in a passing moment. But the child does not process it as temporary frustration. They process it as identity, and that is where labeling becomes dangerous. Because now the child is no longer thinking, I made a mistake. They start thinking, I am the mistake. And once that belief forms, it begins to shape behavior. A child labeled as lazy may stop trying altogether. A child labeled as not good enough may stop attempting challenges. Not because they cannot, but because they believe they will fail anyway. This is how labels become self fulfilling. But here is the hopeful truth: words can also heal what they once hurt. Instead of labeling the child, we can separate the action from the identity. You made a mistake, but that doesn't define you. This behavior needs improvement, but I believe in you. Now something very different happens. The child is still accountable but not ashamed. They are corrected but not crushed. And that difference is everything. Because shame destroys identity, but guidance builds it. A child who grows up without negative labels develops resilience. They understand that mistakes are events, not identities. They learn to say, I failed at this instead of I am a failure. That small difference becomes the foundation of emotional strength in adulthood. And there is another subtle impact. Children often become what they repeatedly hear. If they hear limitation, they live limitation. If they hear possibility, they grow into possibility. So, as parents, we must be careful not only with what we correct, but with how we define. Because every word we speak is not just communication, it is construction. We are building a child's inner voice. And one day, when we are not around, that voice will continue speaking to them. The question is, will it be kind or critical? Fear is a shortcut. It works quickly, but it rarely lasts. When a child is afraid, they may obey, they may listen, they may even appear disciplined. But underneath that obedience, something fragile is forming, a relationship based not on understanding but on avoidance. Many parents unknowingly use fear as a tool: fear of punishment, fear of anger, fear of losing love. But fear does not teach wisdom, it teaches survival. A child who is raised in fear learns to avoid mistakes not because they understand consequences, but because they want to escape punishment. And once the authority is removed, so is the behavior control. That is why fear based parenting often fails in the long term. A child might follow rules at home but behave differently outside. Not because they are bad, but because they were never taught internal discipline. They were only taught external control. Love, on the other hand, creates internal alignment. When a child feels safe, they begin to ask questions. Why is this right? Why is this wrong? And in that space of curiosity, real learning happens. Fear shuts questions down. Love opens them up. And here is something very important. Children raised with fear often struggle with self worth because fear teaches them that mistakes lead to rejection. And so they begin to associate love with performance. But love should never feel conditional. A child should not feel, I am loved only when I do well. They should feel, I am loved even when I am learning. That is where emotional security is built. Discipline is still important, but discipline rooted in understanding is far more powerful than discipline rooted in fear. One creates obedience, the other creates character. And character is what remains when no one is watching. In today's world, parenting has become increasingly busy. Parents are providing more than ever better education, better food, better opportunities. But in the process, something very simple and irreplaceable is slowly disappearing: presence. Presence is not just physical availability, it is emotional availability. A child does not remember the brand of the toy you bought them. They remember whether you sat with them while they played. They don't remember how expensive the school was. They remember whether you asked them how their day went and waited for the answer. Because to a child, time is love. And when parents are physically present but emotionally absent, scrolling phones, thinking about work, distracted in conversations, the child feels it. They may not say it, but they feel unseen. And feeling unseen is one of the deepest forms of loneliness. Children don't always need long lectures or perfect advice. Often they just need your attention, your laughter, your listening, your quiet sitting beside them. Because in those small moments, something very big is formed: emotional security. A child who receives presence grows up with the belief that they matter, that their thoughts are worth listening to, that they are not an interruption in someone's life, but an important part of it. And here is the deeper truth: presence today becomes memory tomorrow. One day, your child will grow up. They will not remember every instruction you gave, but they will remember how it felt when you were there, or how it felt when you weren't. So the question is not how much you provide, it is how much of yourself you truly give. Because in the end, children don't need perfect parents, they need present ones.